right, hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. This is your afternoon tropical update. Tonight, we are still tracking Tropical Storm Bret in the central tropical Atlantic basin, circled right about here, and we have its friend Invest 93L tagging along further behind. We continue to track a very strange pattern in the month of June in the tropics, where we have two African waves moving through what we call the main development region, which is our area between the Caribbean Sea and the coast of Africa. Typically, this is a pattern you would see in August or September, but we are dealing with not one, but two active storms, well, one and a half, I guess, in the month of June. Very strange, as we've talked about in the previous videos, but our storms have both found out today that climatology exists for a reason. Climatology, of course, the study of the past weather in certain areas and what we typically expect for certain times of year. As I've noted, we don't typically expect storms out here in the month of June. Bret is actually the furthest east developing tropical storm in this region on record, and both these storms have realized today that they are not exactly as welcome as they may have thought in the first place. Both storms have trended in the weaker direction today, and forecasts have changed for both, so let's not waste any time getting into it. Afternoon advisory on Tropical Storm Bret. This is a 5 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Those maximum sustained winds are 45 miles an hour, and the movement is to the west at a brisk 18 miles an hour. We do have tropical storm watches in effect for Barbados and Dominica, and we will have likely several more for most of the Lesser Antilles in the coming days. This looks like it's going to stay well south of the U.S. and British Virgin Islands, or at least some of them, and it looks like it's going to clear south of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, but some of these smaller islands to the south definitely can still expect a tropical storm. Now, the forecast coming for the Hurricane Center tells us two things. Number one, the turn to the north that we talked about yesterday, where Bret was going to be able to be a little stronger and feel some more northerly steering flow, well, that door is pretty much shut. Bret is going to be forced down to the south. The storm is not expected to be as strong, and there is no longer much of any chance that Bret is going to turn north and turn out to sea. So this is going to get into the Caribbean. However, if you have been paying close attention on the current forecast cone, you'll notice that this is all S's. Well, that's because the National Hurricane Center no longer forecasts Bret to become a hurricane. Their opening bid was for Bret to reach hurricane status, at least briefly, category 1 or so, 75, 80 miles an hour, give or take, but they have reduced that now to keeping it as a tropical storm throughout its life. That is because the storm has struggled somewhat today, and there's evidence that the things plaguing Bret are going to continue to plague Bret, and then things only get worse when the storm winds up in the Caribbean Sea sometime late on Thursday, early Friday, where then a more extensive weakening phase is anticipated, with the storm potentially becoming completely dissipated sometime by the early weekend. We'll tell you why. Quick investigation of the afternoon satellite presentation of Bret does show a storm that's kind of exposed. The afternoon look here is got a nice little curved band out to the west, out ahead of the storm, and you have a nice little half curved band moving in with some decent thunderstorm activity. But the storm in the middle is literally gutted. You can actually see the low level flow right here. This is the kind of western edge of the circulation center in the low levels. And two things we owe to this. Number one, it looks like there's much drier air, especially on multispectral imagery. You can see that there's a lot more dry air than maybe it looks on the satellite presentation. And you also see that there is a little bit of westerly wind shear. The Hurricane Center notes this in their discussion, and it looks like it's coming in somewhere just under the cirrus canopy, because the high clouds, these little wispy clouds, are still moving away in most directions. So it looks like the shear is not upper level. You can see these little frilly clouds moving out, but there's some kind of mid-level shear somewhere that is exposing Bret, because when you have dry air and you have shear, you kind of force or punch the dry air into the middle of the storm, and that is oftentimes detrimental when you have a weak, or in Bret's case too, a small storm. They're much more susceptible to big intensity fluctuations. So Bret has been gulping in some dry air today and dealing with some westerly wind shear, and already being a small storm, it's not faring very well. This is not surprising, because the models didn't really forecast that dry air or shear, but it is the month of June. It is dry and sheery. That is why we don't typically have storms in June and July. So that is why Bret is probably struggling a little more than anticipated. We kind of had to weigh the small storm and the volatility of small storms ramping up quickly with the climatology, and it looks like in this case the climatology did win. Latest forecast models for Bret now show at uniform westerly track for the most part, one or two outliers, but even the GFS and Euro, almost not a single member today actually is forecasting any more northward turn. Remember, the GFS had a bunch of these models pulling it out of the Caribbean before it made its way in there. Today, none of them are showing that. and they're also in that uniform westward motion, and most of them dissipate the storm or greatly reduce the storm's chance. When you see it kind of curve down like that and turn gray, that's just the model dissipating the storm without it really telling you that for the most part. This is all because the Caribbean is not going to be welcoming to Bret when it gets in there. This is the GFS model valid for Friday morning. Bret circled right about here, just on the other side of the Antilles, and this wall of upper level wind shear out of the west coming in to just absolutely hammer Bret. And the overall atmosphere is expected to be much drier than it already is, so Bret will be moving into even drier air and going into the Caribbean graveyard, as we call it this time of year, where it will likely meet a demise. The Hurricane Center does forecast Bret dissipate sometime on Saturday or Sunday, and it's very likely that's what will happen. And even if it doesn't, it's probably just going to keep trucking west and go into Central America. I don't think there's any world where this thing can turn north. The upper pattern over the eastern U.S. is just not welcoming. So right now, it does not look like Bret is much of an issue for the eastern U.S., but the Antilles can definitely still expect a tropical storm. All these islands should be expecting a tropical storm and preparing for one. And even if Bret does not strengthen much, stays, say, 45, 50 miles an hour, given the coupled with the forward motion at 18 miles an hour, if you're on the north side of this cone, you're still going to get hit pretty good because you have to basically add the forward speed to the wind speed. So if the winds are blowing to the north at 45 miles an hour and the storm is moving at 18 miles an hour, that's almost a 65-mile-an-hour wind. This is still going to be a nice little squall of heavy weather coming through here, so I wouldn't sleep on it if I was on these islands. I'd definitely be batting down the hatches, but Bret is not going to be some massive, life-altering sort of storm, something that is very common for these islands, just maybe not this time of year. All right, let's move on to Invest 93L, that little storm following Bret. Hurricane Center holding that 80% chance of development this afternoon, but they have noted that, the activity in the showers and thunderstorms have diminished with 93L. Pretty easy to tell on infrared satellite. This is the afternoon IR pass, and it's sad. I tell you, this is a sad little storm right now. Still got a nice little center of circulation to it. I'll give it that. If you look at back on the True Color, look at the high res here, definitely has a pretty clear circulation. I mean, it's nice. It's not bad. There are just no thunderstorms anchored out. One little hot tower to the north right at the end of the frame, and then maybe like one little half storm over here. But the dry air also definitely choking this storm off as well, and it's not been able to really get a whole lot going. There's just a lot of dry air pumping into this region, and it's just not ready yet. I mean, the cake is not ready yet. I mean, the outside may look cooked, but the inside is just not. And that's what we're looking at in this region in the month of June. Even if the conditions were enough to get these storms started, it's just not ready for them. So this system is going to still be over pretty warm water, and it will have more of a chance to develop. The Hurricane Center still gives us a decent shot to develop. And given this kind of robust low-level circulation, I think we'll still get at least tropical depression out of this. Maybe we'll eke out Cindy or whatever the next name is on the naming list, but I would not be shaking in my boots. Future of 93L here, the suite of models does take this one more to the north and eventually rides this one out of town. A nice little break in the ridges. We go into Saturday. Bret's over here just getting it just pummeled in the Caribbean. The high pressure pushing Bret to the west has retrograded, and their new high is built in back over the eastern Atlantic. And it looks like 93L, which would be right here, is going to move up and kind of slip in between these two highs and move out to sea. So after that, we'll have to watch this next wave leaving Africa. That'll be something else to watch. We'll see if this one fares any better than the first two. But if it's any indication, it is still the month of June, and these storms are struggling. So right now, again, Bret forecast to go in the Caribbean. Very likely dies off. Not going to be a threat to the eastern U.S., it appears. And 93L is going to turn more to the north, and it does not appear to be a threat either. So we'll still track both of them. We'll have the latest on the page every day. But I'm probably not going to be back with a video unless something changes here. Just a lot of fish food for early June. So that's what I got for you guys today on your tropical update. As always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.